Let me call to order the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting of Monday, May 4th, 2015.
Here, here.
First order of business is to approve the minutes of April 6th.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion carried. Any announcements? I don't have any. Does anyone else?
Tomorrow night, we have a presentation before
Oh,
the
yeah.
select board. And they haven't loaded up the agenda, so they're going to give us about an hour or so.
Yes.
Wow.
We'll be presenting on the zoning districts, and we'll be presenting on the rural land use, such as subdivisions and some of the rural planned unit developments and some of the resource protection standards. So if you can make it out, come join us, please. May 19th, the select board will be having a public hearing on the proposed amendment to the town plan, the one that we had a hearing on at the last meeting, so.
Did they consider,
Yes.
Yeah.
did they
Yes.
consider that controversial in any way?
No. And we don't permit contemplating it as controversial either.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just that sometimes things that we don't think are controversial.
Yes.
think maybe. So I asked.
That's good.
Okay, so there's no public for public comment. So let's just move right into Randy Saxon and her presentation on the land use regulations.
Okay. So did you send the water and recreation link
No.
out, or should I?
No,
just-
because I just got it this morning.
Yeah, I didn't think
By the
so.
time I opened up my email.
So at the last meeting, you requested that I work on the purpose statement to the water and recreation district. I did that.
So one of the packets that you maybe picked up off the table, there was a memo, a couple-page memo, but then under that, there was some new chapters.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not get it all?
Oh, all right, yes, water.
So the revised water and recreation district purpose statement. So is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. People can read it themselves. I don't have to read it out loud.
What is it that we're looking at right now?
Just that purpose statement on
We're
240.
looking
Like right
brand new
here.
revised purpose statements.
The fat thing that's, yeah, it's flipped.
Are any of those policies likely to be objectionable to privately owned people, land there?
Any of the,
Well, there's those 1, 2, 3, 4.
Or
Encourage the management or development of these lands in accordance with.
I can't hear you.
I was just reading it out loud,
Oh.
sorry.
I mean, I don't really, I did try to emphasize the pathway concept to try to help bolster that.
Brandy and I were talking a little bit about it beforehand, and I felt like whatever the development or, activity that was going on didn't have to do all three.
Right.
So maybe some sort of, I was trying to think on the fly of a way to reword it so that it wasn't necessarily that I had to do all four of those things, but that these were kind of the, some sort of unifying feature of land.
So like some measures may include, well,
Yeah, or it could just do an
activities
and/or,
such as?
a colon list with and/or at the last one, so I can tweak the wording or,
Yeah,
takes advantage of their proximity to water through approaches such as,
yeah.
I think just switch out by for such as, and then
Yeah.
I wouldn't read that each development application has to meet each of the
Yeah.
4 policies.
Yeah,
I like that change, and otherwise I think it was good.
What did I just say?
Such
I'm gonna do
as.
some
Such
sort of
as.
such as statement
Such as.
in there that's nice and grammatically correct.
Yes.
I just do that naturally,
Uh-huh.
I just wondered, seeing you were mentioning pushback, I just wondered if that would be a place where people who own, people who privately own, I'm not so concerned about the town-owned or,
Like if somebody's on a tributary stream, for example.
pardon me?
But it has to be in the district.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I would say that the lands that are privately held that are covered by this zoning district are, for the most part, in a good situation to take advantage of the physical asset that is the water.
Okay.
And so, insofar as it might be difficult for the existing owner to grasp, it does something positive potentially for the land value, and a different owner with a different vision could develop that parcel in a way that was consistent with these policies.
waterfront property.
Waterfront property is waterfront
Yeah.
property. It's,
Oh, yeah.
it does feel a little bit weird to actually have to explain to people that it's, worth something.
There's
But, it's just, I'm obviously not from here. So, yeah. Yeah, the prevailing Northern New England ethos is that that's what you push your cars up against, the ones you don't drive anymore. But in the rest of the world, actually, it's not what we do.
Okay. So that's headed in the right direction with a little more refining. We'll have it.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Okay. So Sue wanted to talk about the industrial district boundaries, and we have the map
Do you
up.
wanna talk about that?
Yeah, okay. To the south of town, there on Route 5, there is an area of land that it borders Guilford. So you see that big purple chunk that the little hand is on right now? There's a piece of green, there's a green triangle to the western, see where the letter R, O?
Sorry.
Okay, it's all right. Okay.
Mouse and
Oh, I'm sorry.
the screen.
Yeah, the green triangle. That is currently zoned rural residential. And the question that we have is, does it make more sense to actually take the industrial all the way through to the town line so that it's consistent on both sides of what is known as Paul's Road, which is a road that services a large, predominantly industrial planned unit development, PUD.
What
So this
is-
is Commonwealth Dairy here?
Yeah.
Is there anything in that green
But there's some
triangle right
houses in
now?
there, isn't
There's
there?
some, there's 3 houses, I believe.
Yeah, at least two.
Spread
Two on
across-
one property and then one other.
Yeah,
There's what? 2 on 1 properties?
There's
Two
two
on-
on one property
and
and
one
then
other.
there's one other.
yeah.
Can you show the parcel lines?
And the rationale, so what we're looking for here is consistency on both sides of the road, basically. And what you'll notice,
Can I show parcel lines on this?
I don't know that I ever gave you one that had the parcel lines in a KML file.
Oh.
do you want to see if you
I can
can,
go into maps.
yeah, I was just going to say, do you want to do it on Maps Online? So while Sue's doing that, and the little person's hopping around, this area here,
That green.
that's rural residential. That forms an important border or gateway between what is a small village, Algiers Village, to the south of here, which is just off screen, and then that area, which allows for the kind of maintenance of that landscape. Those things are not in question so much for either side of Paul's Road for topographical reasons as much as anything else. So on the western side of Route 5, the road's quite steep and difficult to access, and so it'll stay a wooded slope on that side, whereas the side that's preserved as rural residential on the eastern side of Route 5 actually could be vulnerable to low density residential development. And so it's a minor adjustment that we're making. We think that there's more purpose to advancing industrial uses in conjunction with the planned unit development as it currently exists. There's now a large water line that services part of that planned unit development, and so the road is in reasonable shape for truck traffic, and there's already truck traffic on it that's substantial associated with the operation of the dairy. So in fact, the use value of that little green triangle as residential is somewhat limited, but that's not the case as you move up and down that Route 5 corridor a little bit to the east. Where you see the town line is demarcated by the zoning district's ending. So where it's just trees, that's Guildford. So even from Route 5, you can't actually really easily establish the industrial nature of that planned unit development. There's no visual impact from Route 5 itself because it's buffered by what is actually Guildford, if you follow what I'm saying.
Is there a large parcel for sale in that area, or is that closer to 91? There was one listed for a while.
There's one closer to 91.
Ah, okay. Is that the one we put into industrial?
Yeah,
Is that
and
the
so
la-
I should just, in terms of context,
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's up by the
And
rail.
that's where the solar
Way off.
farm is.
we'll get to that later on. So
Let's see context.
this area in here,
Yeah.
under the existing zoning, is zoned rural residential. And in fact, because of the proximity to this area, which is industrial, we've asked, so all this is basically new compared to now, right? And that's in recognition again of its proximity to the exit 1 on and off ramps, the proximity to this existing industrial park, and the fact that it's a very large parcel of which there's sort of a ridge line running through here, of which some could be developed into a relatively large scale industrial use. And then you can either access Route 5 down here or a little closer to the on-ramp, actually down here or here. So this pocket here is preserved. There's an existing low-density residential neighborhood with some other uses mixed in. I think there's a panel shop or something that's pre-existing and dates back a long time. But there's a small row of houses that are down below the height of the road through here, and then it continues on through this part of
It's
Route
an
5.
auto body.
What is
With the
in
residents.
that whole purple
Yeah.
zone, like currently and lower too, to the left, like on the left? Sorry, the west side.
Okay.
Yeah, that whole, what is there right now? I mean, it looks like a large area that's forested right now, so I guess
Yes.
there's a little bit of.
So,
That's trails.
these are trails that you can just make out here. This is a cleared land. There's a small this is a small office here that started off as a residence. This is the Omega Optical headquarters, and this is the Commonwealth Dairy yogurt plant.
There's the school in there too.
They moved.
No, it was there. It's moved to Austin School.
Oh.
The school used to be here, and it's moved. So this apparently is now going to be used by Omega Optical, which is here.
It's also former junkyard land.
The whole slope from about here all the way down to Guildford was a junkyard, and there's still evidence of that use. If you're after a 1926 Dodge rear end, it's about there.
Huh.
So
Isn't that part of Bob Johnson's PUD, and he was going to
Yes.
put residences up in there?
yes, yes. And then can you just go scroll, grab it, and go drag it down. Okay.
There's the Austin.
And so then there's the Austin School here. So at this point, and the Austin School property is large, right? But they share a border with these two properties. And there's a series of trails through here that that can be accessed either from this side or from this side.
So the PUD for Austin and the PUD for Omega, or
The
whatever,
Delta campus, yeah.
have a common border,
Yes.
but you've got green in the middle there?
Yes, because this is more of like the campus setting, but this is part of the Austin School PUD, but isn't it accessed?
It's access off of Guilford Street.
Oh,
And,
so
That's kind
if there
so,
was
that
actual
residential?
access.
Green is residential.
yeah, rural residential.
Right.
So that.
So this is land held by them, but it's not really associated with the layout of the campus.
But it's still under PUD?
Yes.
That green part. Okay,
Yeah.
so really the edge of their lands and the PUD is right where the green
Yes.
is. Got it.
Right. So then if you wish I had my own mouse. Yeah. So yeah, so this is a parcel boundary, not a road. This is the only road.
No, right, that's trails.
These are trails, yeah. Sorry. So this is the main road, vehicular road. It peters out at around about this point, becomes pretty much just a track, and then but our attention is focused right down here, and so all we would do is propose to change this from green to purple straight across here, in recognition of the road, the services, the amount of traffic, and the it's just a consistency question.
Okay.
One thing to point out, yeah, the one thing to point out is that it will make those houses that are in there non-conforming.
That's right.
Right.
Can I just get just a question? There's only the two or three.
I think there's only 3 homes.
So that would be
Why
good.
wouldn't we, if it's about consistency, just change it going like this instead so that those houses can still stay rural? I mean, and just cut it that way instead of having them.
That would work. This
That-
way.
But leave
That
part of
goes with the
green,
parcel
what you're
lines?
saying.
Yeah,
Oh, is it
these
parcel
follow
lines?
parcel lines now, yeah.
So if those people wanted to build a garage and we did this, you'd say no dice, right?
And they'd have to get a variance or something?
No, they can continue.
They can
build
continue
a
their
garage.
use. I mean,
They
it's-
can
it's not-
continue a residential use.
Right.
Oh, you can, okay.
Yeah, sure.
If it
Just because they're
goes
non-conforming
there-
doesn't mean to say that they can, building a garage next to your home is not going to
Well,
exacerbate
may they not
non-conformity
like that
relative
the
to
rest of the
industrial.
back of their properties becomes industrial?
Might be more valuable.
Right. I think it opens up as many choices as there's opportunities as well as pressure, but it's a much more consistent.
Yeah, it sounds like with
Yeah, I
that.
don't disagree with that per se, but I'm just wondering about those, if I was one of those homeowners, I might not want the back end of whatever I abut becoming an industrial zone.
Well, this is following the property.
But it already
line, so-
is.
This follows the
already
property
is.
line and the town line,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? So if this is the back, then it already is industrial, and if this is the back, it's Guilford, which has no zoning.
That's right.
So, quick lesson in the virtues of land use planning.
Okay, so
Yeah,
what do we think?
I think it sounds like probably the best purpose of that land is for
Right.
the industrial use.
Right, I think its first best use is as the continuation of industrial uses, given the traffic and the activity that's already here.
And leaving the
It's-
other one along Route 5 as rural residential
leave it-
because it's on the frontage on Route 5
And it has a gateway
as a
function.
gateway.
Yeah.
And what about the little chunk along Route 5 between those two rural residential
The purple
areas?
chunk between the two?
This little area, it's enough of a neighborhood, we're talking
Yeah.
No,
upwards
no, I'm
of
talking about the purple.
South
Like,
of that.
wouldn't it make sense to possibly connect those, or is that a parcel?
these two.
Yeah.
Do you mean this one here?
No, the purple in the
This
middle.
is-
greens.
Yeah,
Yep.
This is actually part of the Exit 1 Industrial Park.
parcel, okay.
Yeah.
Is there a risk that you would create obsolete lots by doing this because the lots in the triangle are too small for the?
No, they're all bigger than the minimum
Yeah.
parcel size for industrial.
All right, we tried to trip you up, we couldn't.
I'm curious, how did this come up? Did you stumble on it and you're like, odd triangle, or?
The whole thing about the virtual Paul's Road and how it works.
You're sitting up at 3 a.m. staring at that map.
I know.
Don't even say it. All right, so.
Are there any other concerns? Do you need us to vote on this, Rob?
I don't think you need to vote. I mean, if we have consensus that we should do that, then the next iteration of the map will show it as purple, which
I
will be
vote
industrial.
yes.
Yes? Okay. So unless there's anyone,
Consensus seems to have been reached.
okay, great.
And so industrial means that that whole forested area, all that purple, could become a solar farm, for instance, if somebody wanted.
It does open up those kinds of opportunities, and actually,
Well, you could have those opportunities regardless.
because of the way the Public Service Board treats us, but which is that we're a zero. So, but yes, it enables that happening more readily, and actually, topographically, it's interesting to the extent that that slope faces southeast. So in fact, it's not a bad location for solar panels. It's open to the south.
Industrial before, or was it something else?
No, this is
Yeah,
this
it's a
is
long.
interesting.
Yeah, okay. So
Actually,
do you want to do this?
This used to be rural residential, but under our existing planned unit development regulations, you were able to change the underlying uses. You know, a planned unit development is a zoning change, and with that, you could change the underlying uses. So this planned unit development came forward with an idea of having some industrial uses kind of where they're located, and then to the
Housing.
left of it, having like housing, kind of like worker housing, or, you know, kind of the old model where you can live up on the hill and walk down to work and live in this area. But really what it's not really, is it fair to say it's not been as successful, lived up to that idea?
It's never realized its potential in that regard. So the first thing to remember is, even though it was zoned rural residential, it was a junkyard, and it was a huge junkyard. It was notoriously large, and so it was like known outside the state as a very large junkyard. And it dates back to the time when Peter Shumlin was young enough to play there. So in fact, most men my age or older who grew up around here have vivid memories of getting their first car on a road by virtue of that junkyard. So,
Makes me want to go there.
like I said, if you're looking for a 27 Dodge rear end, that's there.
Go ahead.
So the key is that when Bob Johnson from Omega Optical bought it, it was to deal with it as a brownfield and to reclaim the land, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And then so when he did that, he also created, through the then zoning processes, the whole area as a PUD, and had this vision of an industrial, light industry and worker housing community, basically, with a heavy orientation towards outdoor activity and trails and so forth. But it's fair to say it hasn't realized its full potential.
The utopian vision hasn't been realized.
And so now that
right.
it would be industrial, they wouldn't be able to do something like that?
They would, but I think the reality is
PUD still exists,
this
so
PUD,
yes. They
Yes.
could still do
the big
what the vision was.
The big turning point, to some extent, is the sale of the land and the creation of Commonwealth Dairy, which is a genuine industrial use, which changes the character of the development to some extent because of the truck traffic and worker. You know, they have 2 shifts. They have 50 employees. So you are talking now about a bona fide industrial
But that
area.
would just be on the lower end, because if
Yes.
the residential happens up at the top where
Well-
he's seen it, that's, you know.
It's got beautiful views, but
Yeah.
there's the question of
There's
whether
the impact.
people will
Yeah.
want to access high-end worker housing
Yeah.
by driving through an industrial subdivision, which is what it is at the lower.
And you still have the impacts. I mean,
Can you also access it from over here, though? I mean, if this part is all forested with trails and
Mhm.
stuff, I mean, couldn't that theoretically be accessed from Guilford Road as well?
Guildford Street does provide access up here. It's very limited, and there's topographical challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's-
really severe topographical challenges. So do you want to scroll? Do you want to? Actually, I can do it. Okay. So you see this little driveway, this little. This goes straight down, and then straight up, and then straight down, and then straight up again, and would be extremely expensive to establish access. But there's a right-of-way, a very small right-of-way through here. It's not big enough to provide emergency vehicle level access to whatever you would subdivide in here. And then there are two wetlands, like this, sort of lozenge shaped here. There's sort of this flattening out of the hill, and then there are two wetlands that kind of make it extremely challenging to develop in here for housing. And then you've got the challenge of the road network. As you go further south on Guildford Street, this is all private land. There's no access here from here to here that's available. You have to buy large amounts of property, demolish the homes, and then establish access, which seems improbable at this point. And then assuming that the topography is not the challenge, which in fact it is, there's a big gully basically running north-south here that you have to traverse. So realistically, given what we know about the housing market and given what we know about a whole bunch of other things, including the Act 250 permit for here and here, this is not a realistic option at this point for access. It would be more likely to come through here, but even that's pretty challenging given what's going on just off the screen there. So.
And the original PUD concept was to come from Paul's Road.
Paul's Road. So the idea was to sort of focus the energy, if you like, or focus the development in this sector here, have the worker housing sort of off the side here.
Why not have it mixed use?
What's that?
Would there be any reason to have it as mixed?
No.
Well,
No, because I mean, at this point, the underlying, all the permitted, the predominance of the uses for each parcel, and it's constructed in a fairly odd way as a PUD, where it's very specifically identified parcel by parcel as to what's permitted. And it's the area and the amount of land available for housing is actually limited. And it just hasn't, it's never taken off.
Yeah.
Where meanwhile, this has taken off.
One of the goals of the town plan was to increase large industrial parcels.
Yes. And I think that, I don't want to speak for Bob Johnson, but I think on balance, he's happier that he's been able to sell a parcel and have it developed for the dairy than to not have sold it. It's the only other.
Yeah, it's the trees. It's the trees that are kind of like looking at that whole forested swath.
I don't.
Yeah, but it seems like they wouldn't be threatened by
I
anything
don't
because
believe
of
the trees are threatened at all.
because
Actually,
of
I don't.
Because of the topography.
Yeah.
I think what you see in terms of the extent of the development is pretty much that area where you can tell there are no trees.
Okay.
It would be the limit of
Yeah, I was just
development.
having that moment of, am I going to look back and that whole area's going to be
Yeah.
paved and I'm going to be like, I was on the planning commission.
No, because our regulations limit clearing on steep slopes.
Okay,
And there's
okay, all right.
steep in
Yes,
there.
right. They're very yeah.
And there's some wetlands.
Right.
in
So I
there
think
as well.
I think that the topographical challenges are such that
Okay.
His proposed plan initially was to allow for something like 5 different industrial lots there, and he had them marked out, and they're pretty much along that area that you see that's open, along that bottom part of the road, and he had certain people, he wanted people to develop the plots in a, what do I want to say, environmentally friendly kind of, or energy efficient kind of way, because Omega Optical is sort of state of the art. I don't know if it's got LED.
LEED.
Yeah.
It's pretty low
but
impact.
But it's close.
And the area up the top part of that upper purple triangle?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, because
That's
I
the
remember
one.
looking at that with people for a
Yes.
like communal living situation. So was that where the
The
property has been for sale and?
So this is the old Latches ski jump again. Really old men remember jumping the ski jump here, in here. And this is also potentially the site for the prison that ended up being built at Springfield, we lost that competition. So, just. But second is first amongst the losers. So, it's very steep, obviously, because it's good enough for a ski jump. And but there's this long, relatively flat terrace around, about parallel to 91. So when you're driving up and down 91, you get to see it. You see where the Austin School is, and that kind of terrace continues down through into here a little bit. Access is a bit challenging, but it's one really big parcel, and it's appropriate to think about it for industrial purposes, given its proximity to other industrial uses, and then the off-ramp on I-91 and the service centre here.
And it's large enough to have its own buffer.
Yeah, it's got more than enough of its own buffer. I mean, I think that realistically, you could develop an industrial site in here and it still would not have a visual impact on road users on 91. Because it's up pretty high.
Is it site for sale?
I think it is. There's there's a smaller parcel along here that's also for sale. If you drive up and down Route 5, you'll see a for sale sign. Yeah, I think the owner is open to offers. Yeah.
All right?
Yeah, so,
While you're up there, can you just point out where we're going to come to it later, but while you have the map there, the solar for down there, is it on there or is
I
it
keep on thinking somebody else is going to move it, but that's okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. So
Further down?
I'm getting used to it now. Okay, so this is John Sides Drive. It ends here. Piece of land that we're talking about is actually tucked in here.
there? Not at the other side.
No. This is the town on water tank, and the property that we're talking about is just to the north of that.
Yeah.
And that's different than what's in our packet here.
Well,
No.
Are we moving on to that?
Oh, it's a second.
No.
So they have two sites. They
Yeah,
have
there's
one
two
by the
sites.
West River and then
We're
this.
just
Okay.
discussing it because we've
While
got the
I'm here, so that you're not confused, I'll show you the other side, because we can.
And I know it's later in the agenda,
There you go,
but
right
I'm here
there.
for the
That's the
for
green.
solar projects.
That right there.
Yeah, it's right there, where the little hand is
That's
the
a
other.
plot. That whole thing is a
Where is,
field.
where are we now?
This is 91. This is the
Mhm.
West River. You
Street
can't
30.
really see here from now because you're so fearful that they're gonna fall off the bridge and it's kind of blocked. But there's a raised kind of terrace here formed at an earlier point in the life of the river. It's about 80 feet above the railroad tracks down here. This is the railroad track. And so it's this area that they're proposing for the second solar installation.
Which reminds me, I do have an announcement. The Route 91 bridge is the bridge of the year, according to Bridge Magazine.
Bridgeport.
Really?
It's not done. How can it be Bridge of the Year when it's not complete?
Because it's designed.
The design.
And it's great beauty.
Even though it's not a year.
It will be a thing of beauty, and
Creating
I
major
like it.
havoc in town when they close parts of it. Jesus.
That's okay. All right. So,
It's really
any other questions about that discussion item?
How
So
many
we-
more questions can we come up with?
I think
I
we've
don't know.
exhausted it all.
All right.
So, urban
Yes.
center floor area ratio. There's been some discussion of this. What you have in your current draft now, for a refresher, sets a maximum floor area ratio of 4, but we allow buildings up to 6 stories. So the question comes, that means that you couldn't, if you had a small lot and you had a building that was essentially the footprint of the lot, you couldn't get 6 stories. You could actually only get 4 because the floor area ratio would max out before the building height would max out. We've looked at a site that's got a potential development on it that would be over the 4. We've looked at what they're looking at and talked a little bit about this and are recommending increasing it to 5, but not to 6, so that even if you did have one of those small footprint lots, aesthetically, do you want a 6-story building coming straight up the size of the lot? You don't have anything really of that
You don't have
character
anything like
now in the downtown. By going to 5, that would allow the top 2 stories, the 5th and 6th stories, they would have to be smaller in footprint. They would be stepped back. So from the street experience, you would look at it, it would really read like a 4-story building, but it would, still provide some opportunity for those 5th and 6th stories. There really aren't a lot of such likely sites in the urban center. I don't think you're going to see a lot of 5 floor area ratio buildings necessarily, but we found one.
Which one?
The one on Flat Street, where
There's not too many infill sites.
The new one,
the
biologic.
new, yeah.
Yeah.
How many was she proposing?
It,
Why was it maybe?
I think that does it have 5 stories, Sue, or 6? I can't
think
remember.
that, conceptually it would be 6.
Yes.
Right.
I
But
think they'll
it
just-
does step back at some point. It doesn't.
It doesn't
Yeah,
go
It's not a
straight up.
6 straight up. And that was the concern with doing a floor area ratio of 6, is that you're going to get you would potentially be allowing a solid block of 6 stories all the way up. And it's not really the pattern of downtown. I mean, it's 4 on the main street.
I mean, I think that there's something to think about with our, like, I'm thinking about like a Hook or Dunham, like, which looks like something from the street, and then it actually has all these because of our hills, And, I think thinking about like Flat Street up to Elliott Street, would it, like if you're actually, I don't know, like I'm just, like if on a flat surface, I think what you're saying, makes perfect sense that you would want to mitigate it, but I just wonder also in relation to our.
So there's
More of
also
a fire truck issue than anything else, I think.
there's the fire truck, and there's
It's a
also
big fire truck
the
issue.
definition of story. So
Okay.
you have to look at the definition of basement
Okay.
in order to see whether some of those lower level
Their
that
basement.
will count as a story or not.
sorry.
It really depends
Yeah.
whether they come out
Is
from
it-
the grade on the one side fully or not.
Yeah.
So in some cases where you're building into the hill, a lower level may not count.
I see.
As a
Okay, but
story.
like in that place, it's a flat spot that would just be going up. Okay.
Yeah, like some of those Hook or Dunham buildings, or even in the,
Like the lower
what used to be called the
three-story
Italian-American building where Omega Optical used to be, down under, Twice Upon a Time. That goes down lower again
A lot
in
of
the
those
back.
buildings do.
And they've developed some of that into office space. But it's from Main Street side, you think of it as basement.
I like the idea of the stepping back on the upper floors. If we're gonna go up. more
Yeah,
than-
I think, architecturally that will keep the scale of the street, and it will also accommodate this proposal, I think, adequately at 5. So that's
Great.
the recommendation.
Thank
You
you.
for that? Okay.
The graduate
Sample,
center.
The Graduate Center?
It's 5
It is?
stories, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's
got a large
It's got a
lot.
large footprint though.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I think we calculated the floor area
When we
ratio on that one.
calculated, when we calculated, lots that were large had no problem, and at 4, there was plenty of room to have more stories or whatever they needed to do. It's the small lots that,
Where the building is essentially, the footprint of the building covers almost the entire lot. That's where this starts to be a limiting factor.
Is fire the only reason it sounds like what we're saying is we want to sort of limit like the height of buildings in the downtown area. Is fire coverage the only reason, or are there others? Consistency?
It's certainly one of the principal reasons, but the other is that compatibility with the historic character, and to what extent, how much higher than the historic pattern would you really want to go? And most of the buildings, the older buildings, maxed out at 4. Although, like we're saying, some of them are built into the hill, so from various sides, they may appear a little bit different, but that tended to be the pattern.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
to be clear on the fire thing, any building of this size that's new to meet fire code would be sprinkled. But it still raises the issue, particularly when it's a mix of uses. So residential, typically what we would be talking about, as in the biologic example, there'll be apartments on at least the top floor. And so where you have that kind of setting, the fire department still wants to be able to access using a ladder truck.
You want to be able to get the old lady out of the top
Yes,
story.
yeah.
Yes,
So-
waving the white hanky.
Or the little cat.
the triangle shirt fire.
Yeah, so,
Cause a lot of land use control.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
Why we're here.
so I think that's the issue, but I think it's just
Yeah,
as important
sure.
for us actually is
And reference
it
that
would
later.
be a really significant shift away from the current streetscape if we were to permit much denser, taller buildings like that.
For sure.
So, and we're also talking about a tiny
Yes, about it.
Yeah, that.
number of existing
Really good show.
locations. I think the flat to Elliott Street hillside is an interesting one. I mean, the parking garage to some extent, depending
Yeah.
on your view about it.
And I don't know anything about the
Right.
biologic
Right,
plan, and I don't want to hold it up, but it sounds very interesting.
right. So there's an example where, it's one or I guess it's 2 levels access from Elliott Street effectively and through, 5 from flat. I wouldn't necessarily call it a success in some ways. And I think, although that's not anyone's idea of a great structure, you run the risk of having some version of that happen. I mean, that,
And a building happened like that.
yeah. So,
Okay,
okay.
moving right along. Sample applications.
Okay, how we do? So
Okay. So at this point, you want space in the middle.
I do want some space here in the middle. So Sue and I spent a little bit of time this afternoon looking at 2 examples of fairly recent development projects and looking at how some of the standards would apply. I looked at and I think probably this is so small scale that I'll end up just passing by. Summarize the findings here. I looked at the Chrysler dealership on Putney Road. You'll have a visual image of that in your mind.
It's north of the roundabout. It's across from Agway, or in the area of Agway.
Got it.
It was redeveloped in the last few years.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of the Chrysler logo building,
Okay, so
silvery.
in looking at, what did it meet from the proposed standards and what it did not, in terms of lot size, building size and height, those elements, it met that. Actually, in terms of the quantity of parking, it comes in pretty close when you consider their employee and customer parking, not excluding the display
You're
parking
running the new
spaces.
proposed zoning
Over this
over
plan.
this, okay.
So that came in pretty much right on what we were recommending there, so it's good on that front. The building there is fairly close to the road. It's about 40 feet, give or take, back from the road, and you got the sidewalk put in at the time that went in. So those were all fitting with the regulations that we've proposed. Where it has a little more difficulty is the amount of green space in front. So under the new zoning, there would have to be more green space. There is 20 feet of green space sort of at each end of the parcel, but then in the middle it shrinks down to be less than 10 feet. So that sort of, most of that 20-foot space along the street would have to stay green. There would
That's
be,
where they display their cars, isn't it?
yes, they do. There is some parking. You'll see that I've sort of X'd out this bits of asphalt that would have to come out of the front buffer here when I pass this around. There is some front display there, parking spaces to display cars, and the entrance in and out is there, but that would obviously be allowed under the current zoning as well, and a sidewalk connector.
So
to the
this
front of the building.
shows how it would be consistent, but it also shows
Some of the things that
benefit
are,
of the more greening that
Right.
we are proposing.
yep. So based on how much frontage they had, right now this front area is planted with 18 shrubs and 3 trees. And under the requirements, it would have to have 6 trees and a total of 55 shrubs. Now, they can be small plantings, but if you think about the green space, would be almost twice what it is now. So probably about a third more actually than some of it already is 20. So more green space, more landscaping up front, essentially, is one aspect I looked at there. And we didn't have time to fully look at every elements of the site, but I also looked in the back of that property. It butts up to the stream. So we would run into the riparian 50-foot setback, and so I've sketched where that falls in on this site plan that I'll hang around. And this is a redevelopment situation, but if you were to imagine it being a new development situation, a little bit of the back of the parking lot runs into the riparian area, so sort of like that back row of parking, which is their employee parking, would have to move out of there. But there is some green space and some stormwater pieces that got put in back there as part of this redevelopment of the site. So it's moving closer to what's required in the zoning, but not quite there. And I ran out of time on sort of the internal landscaping and buffering and such, but certainly there isn't any internal landscaping within the car dealership, and there would have to be some under the draft and buffering around the edges. So you're really looking at a fair amount more green space associated with the use, but the actual setting of the building itself and positioning of the building itself is fairly consistent with what the regulations would be looking for. So I'll pass this around and you can kind of get a sense of my little sketched in notes.
That sounds like a great exercise, thank you.
And then
Yeah.
I looked at the Walgreens on Canal Street.
What are these spots marked off?
I was starting to count out how many parking spaces you can have contiguous before there needed to be a break. So I was starting to show that the parking lot has to be broken up with some
How did you
green
guys
spaces.
decide which sites to look at?
We just tried to pick some more recent that might be kind of.
We wanted to test some of the landscaping and setback and
Yeah.
things, so we just looked at some commercial.
Yeah, I mean, it was
things.
looking at landscaping and just kind of ones
Which
that
one is
maybe.
this?
Oh,
This is Walgreens on Canal Street. So this is Canal Street. Oh, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I didn't mention the lot coverage. That car dealership has about 72% lot coverage, and under the zoning, we would allow up to 60. So you can see how all those features, all those factors sort of linked together, the under
Landscaping,
landscaping,
the
greens,
coverage, and-
yeah,
The riparian area.
yeah.
So this is Canal Street and this is Fairground. It's now 2 parcels, so I acted like this was kind of the edge of the property in the back, just for the purposes of the exercise. The parcel is 1.5 acres. The building is 14,560 square feet. We have a maximum building square footage of 12,000 square feet in this district, so it's a little bit larger than we want. The floor area ratio.
Is that a standard size for Walgreens?
Yep.
And so
It's one of their-
could they live with the smaller size?
No, I think that's probably the smallest of their 3 standard offerings at this point in the Northeast.
So they would move to a different part of town if they
No.
No,
I mean-
not them moving. I'm saying if there was no Walgreens in town and they were looking under the new zoning, they
they
would
would-
not be able to go there. They would have to,
they'd have to go
if they
somewhere,
wanted
yes.
to build in Brattleboro, find another place to build.
Yeah.
Where would they be able
I
to
don't know
build?
how.
The service center.
I
The
think
service
about
center.
Brattleboro then
Because if
God,
you-
Elizabeth, you're hurting me.
Hotel Pharmacy.
I know.
would you like some
Brattleboro
almonds?
Pharmacy.
I like the almonds.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a pretty typical size store for,
If you go into Walgreens
chain.
somewhere else, you feel like you don't
Isn't
know where
that
you
in a
are.
service
You know, you could be
center?
anywhere.
Yeah.
it's gonna be in the neighborhood center. So right now it is in a commercial district. We want to move it to a more pedestrian friendly, like, I think the distinguishing between the service center and the neighborhood center is we want more residential infill and more pedestrian friendly in the neighborhood center.
Service center.
So is that whole
Bring the buildings
strip mall
closer.
across the street gonna stay, is that service center or?
It's in the
center?
neighborhood center. That has a lot of infill opportunities on the
Perimeter.
Canal Street side.
perimeter. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually-
And there's even a pad for sale,
Right.
or, that they're
You
looking.
could lease a long-term land lease. So Sue, this is a Walgreens question that's really going to get you going. You know the one in Walpole?
It's a Rite Aid now.
Is it Rite Aid now?
No, it's a
isn't it?
Walgreens. It used to be Rite Aid. Yes.
Don't you think it's smaller than this one?
I do think it's smaller than this one.
So
But
maybe
it had
there is-
previously been a Rite Aid.
Yes. It's not their layout.
It is, it's definitely
It's not
smaller.
their configuration.
But
So-
clearly, they can be flexible if it's an
They
appropriate
usually,
situation.
if they
Yeah.
want to be there, they can usually.
Yes, they can usually find a way.
Well, that's awesome.
I'm sure they have some sort of rural template,
One
Yeah.
can only hope.
We're it.
In this zoning district, buildings are supposed to be 10 to 40 feet. Actually, I never checked that. I brought my ruler.
You did bring your ruler.
I can tell you.
Can you
From
read
the
this
front
one?
setback, I can read this one. It's further,
We're watching planning.
it's about 40
outlook here.
feet, so, yeah, so it's good that way. Side setbacks are 10 feet, and it works there. We'd go 40 feet on Fairground though as well, right? So
Yeah, so that would
this
be
would have to be
about-
deeper, the landscaped area would have to be.
Would have to basically match the other side?
Yeah, it would have to be kind of this deep around.
Right.
And the building, would the building then have to be up? So the building, this would force the building, one of the criticisms of this building kind of is that it's done everything that was asked to do, and people are like, oh, it's too bad it's not on the corner. Under the proposed regulations, it would actually push it to the corner, because you'd have 40 feet from Fairground and 40 feet from Canal.
So what they did,
If you're corner lot,
what,
it's two.
what they did under the existing regulations was say, it is at the front of the lot.
They used canal.
So in
street
the
instead.
new regulations, it would push the parking to the back and the
Just back
store
on the
to
side,
front.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it would bring the
You
building.
could have some to the side.
So it would be more of a
But-
town center thing,
Right.
which is
Right.
what Danford wanted.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a requirement of a landscape buffer of, you can choose between 15 feet and 10 feet for your neighboring properties within the same district. So this is neighborhood center, this would be neighborhood center. It meets the depth requirement, and it's pretty close on the plantings. I think it's a little bit short on on large trees. So it's supposed to, this is 240 feet, this distance, and it's supposed to have 4 large trees. It's kind of debatable if it has any large trees. There's probably some medium-sized trees. So,
Isn't big twigs.
yeah, there's lots of shrubs, and, I mean, according to the
Caliber pears, They're
planting.
never gonna get that big.
This is much closer to what we want in a planting plan than the other
The
one we looked at, but it's still not quite there. This should have street trees, and it only has shrubberies on
Yeah.
Canal Street and Fairground, so
Shrubberies.
it would
Aren't there a couple trees in there?
I didn't pick out any trees here. There's trees in the parking lot, I think, right?
Yeah.
And is there sidewalk on the?
There is sidewalk.
Yes.
Yep.
On Canal and Fairground, there is connections to the sidewalk from the street.
Kids always cut through, though. They never walk on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And by cutting through, then they make a stop
Oh,
in.
bravo, it's good, and it'll be even better.
Yeah.
It sounds great.
The width of the parking aisles is complying. It's supposed to be greater than 20 feet. It's about 20, a little bit more.
It's better to look at this one, because that's Bunny Road.
So,
The one thing I'd be interested about in the original
It's
application
upside down. totally.
is where they proposed
I
to
read it.
do snow storage, or how they proposed to deal with snow storage, and whether our proposed regulations address snow storage for lots like this.
It's an interesting idea because of the having plantings all the way around.
Well, in fact, somewhat in sympathy to the operators of the site, this year, I think it was right here that they
Yeah.
had a big snow mountain that was probably 40 feet high and came out so that it blocked this whole drive aisle. And it stayed there for a pretty long
Till
time.
yesterday.
Yeah. Actually, we still have one at home. We still have a pile of snow. It hasn't gone yet. So, I'm thinking it's curious. It's a curious problem to me. It's clearly very expensive to truck it off-site.
Yeah.
And they're disinclined to do that. This is one of those places, like lots of other retail places, where they actually leave the loaders in the parking lot all winter long, and then somebody just swings by, jumps in the loader, pushes the snow around, and then parks the loader and drives to the next place.
Like at Academy School.
Yeah. And so I don't really know. You're from upstate.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing about increasing or decreasing the lot coverage is that you are opening up some more green space that if properly laid out could potentially do some duty for snow storage, although you have to be careful in combination with the planting, because it has to be, you know.
Resistant to being
resistant
crushed
to
by
being crushed.
by ice and loaders.
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't come up with a plant that does that yet, but
And salt.
and salt
And salt.
and gravel. Actually, and gravel, just grit and cigarette butts
Yeah.
and
But, I mean, Sue and I were kind of talking
Each
about
one,
that,
I think, yeah.
about the amount of green space in response to these, but I guess it goes back to thinking how much of the green stormwater infrastructure we're gonna try to infiltrate into these sites, or you can get into these sites. And some of that also goes back to snow storage, but I mean, on a site like this, there just isn't gonna be any place to store it when we get, 4 feet.
Yeah.
right.
When you get a big, huge,
Right, and
it's just,
I think
it's
this-
unrealistic to set aside that much land
Yeah.
on each site to store
Yeah.
that much snow necessarily.
Well, I mean, that's sort of what I was getting
Yeah.
at. That in fact, if I was representing the developer, the argument that I'd be making is that I need more parking spaces than you might otherwise think to accommodate really big mountains of snow in snowy years, and that the best place to put the snow pile is on top of blacktop. I know, and you're just being kind of the devil's advocate here. But
Well, it probably is the best place to put the snow. 'cause it's
Well, there just
salty.
won't be that much more snow coming here. So. You know, I don't
Your
think
word
this
for
year is
It's-
typical.
It's not necessarily
You do.
global warming, it's just climate change.
It's gonna be crazy back
Yeah.
and forth. And we can't know.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, so it's one of those things. It's like you're gonna. It's a contingency planning
Yeah.
situation for something where like may or may not be that difficult depending for how many
And for how
months
many
out of
more
the year and what problem is it really? You know what I mean? Like, so what? They piled their snow there and they blocked their own aisle. People could still come in and park, and it's no impediment. So to me, it sort of seems like it's like a perfectly reasonable adjustment to a winter with a lot of snow that you may not have to do for another couple of years. Or
But if we were going to describe title limits on the number of parking spaces, that would be the pushback. That
Yeah,
most years it's parking spaces, and most of the year it's parking spaces, but I want the extra space because I want to be able to provide parking for my customers under the
And
circumstances
pile my snow.
and pile my snow. And so for this site, that I don't think it ever got acute, but there were times when I went for my almonds and it was like limited parking. And so,
it's for almonds at Walgreens.
I don't know.
They're on sale.
They're permanently on sale. It's just one of those funny Liz jokes that we have. It's like they've never been the real price for years. So, and other places like Hannaford's and Price Chopper and stuff have their own snow storage issues, and they do it, more or less badly or well, depending on your standpoint. If you look at Hannaford's lot now, you can see a lot of damage that was created by them piling snow up. It's been quite expensive and damaging. But it's just one of those things that I feel like in this climate, in this area, we could get pushback around that. Or I think in an earlier version, we were looking at people being able to show on plan where they proposed to put the snow for reasons to do with water quality implications of it and so forth. So
Well, this is a good example. We actually, this one was required to show
Right,
where they
the
pushed the
kayak.
snow because nobody wanted it pushed over into the
to the
brook.
brook, exactly.
So, I mean, that was.
So there are times when it does become actually kind of a operations and management
But I would
issue,
rather
operations and
that
maintenance issue.
that applicant make that case.
Yes.
I mean, there are ways to get more parking, and I
Yeah.
don't want to plan around having
No,
extras.
no, I just wanted us to be conscious of once you start getting into relatively tight calculations, that's it's a possible pushback, that's all.
And I mean, we've minimized the parking down, and you can double it before there's really double that minimum before there's any pushback on why are you putting so much parking in. So I don't think we've dialed it down so
Too high,
far
okay.
that they're gonna
That's fine.
be too difficult.
And don't misconstrue, I'm not here working for the
Brattleboro
No.
applicants.
Yeah, we're gonna beat you up after.
The Asphalt Association, your pocket.
I prefer my roads dirt, so there you go. So, and my parking lots. So, okay, so I just want to,
I didn't get around to looking at the building design, Randy, if you're feeling more fluent on it, but
do you want me to turn on the light? This light's,
kind of
Yeah.
Might help us not
It's starting to
fall
get cold in
asleep.
here,
The
too.
blue
is cold in
light.
here.
For a hot day.
Don't go toward the blue light. that's what we
Yeah, yeah. And
You don't have to.
without
I mean, I don't
having-
mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I would have to measure it off. I mean, I think the very front of the building in terms of the windows are probably gonna meet the minimum requirements. Along the side where it's, yeah, I'm wondering about the fairgrounds roadside has less windows and more walls, so that one might have run into trouble.
If you think this is useful, I mean, I could
Yeah,
spend
I
some
think it's very
time.
helpful.
We can
for us
try
to
this
see
some
the
more
practical
of these.
implications of the zoning, so maybe in
Yep.
subsequent meetings we
We
can have
can-
more of that. You
yeah.
think so?
Oh, yeah, it's very helpful.
Yep. All right.
Now that we've had a refresher course in using the
And
scales,
well, looking at this
we'll
one,
be
like,
going
oh
more
no, it's the
efficient.
architectural one. Oh no, it's got use.
Gotta flip that scale.
It's been a while for us.
I gave Brandy my
One
engineering
inventory.
one, and I couldn't. I was like, I picked up his architectural. I can't use this one. I only know the engineering.
Okay.
Is that it? Brenda?
That's it, unless anyone has other
A different
issues
ruler.
that they would like to raise about the regulations. We're got a few more things that we're chasing down and refining. I think we're close to getting you, I don't know, Sue, what you were envisioning, but you've got your meetings with the select board. I would assume following that, we would sort of have a wrap-up discussion of final changes.
And then public hearing draft.
And
Right.
then be ready to start moving
Yeah.
forward with that, so.
Brandy did provide you if you're,
I have a running memo.
Yeah.
Yeah, a running memo. So, I mean, we decided not to go through it because a lot of it is just, she made changes from the last meeting or things that we had talked
Yep.
about or her own cleanups.
Yep, so you saw that memo previously, new stuff is bold. I'll unbold it all now, and I'll keep going.
Okay.
Adding to the
Great.
same memo.
Thank
So
you.
that when we get done, we will have a memo that outlines all the changes from that last public draft to the next public draft.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Okay, good evening.
Maybe you could
Are
get
you all
one
set?
before
Do you need to
it's
get back in the office?
No, I don't think I do. I
You sure?
think I brought everything, yeah,
Okay. So you're all set to go?
I am.
All right. Have a nice, it's a nice evening for a drive. See you.
Good night, Brandy.
Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you, Brandy.
Okay, so Rod and Sue, you want to tell us about these solar,
Yeah, yeah, why don't we make a start?
introduce the
Yeah.
Yep.
regulations and so forth.
So, some of you may, actually, very few of you will
Thanks.
recall this. Okay. So let's look at, there's two things included in your packet. There's two letters, one from Winstanley Enterprises LLC and another from
Greenland.
Green Lantern Group. Both relate to solar projects, but different parcels. And we've lost our internet access, so I can't play around.
Well, that's good you showed us where they
Yeah,
were
it's good
before.
to
Yeah, right before we lost
So
it.
these are unrelated?
Yes.
Yes.
There's no corporate tie that I'm aware of,
Okay.
or anything. So the regulatory framework for solar panel installations of this size is set by the Public Service Board. And so the process that we're just at the outset of is what the applicant is called, what is called for the applicant the certificate, obtaining the certificate of public good. So in public service.
We did this for the
Yeah.
other solar thing for
Yeah.
Winstanley.
So the first thing is the question of whether the town wishes to waive the 45-day notice period, allowing the applicants to submit their paperwork to the Public Service Board earlier than 45 days, and the town did not waive that requirement. And so what this does is give various panels within the town, the Conservation Commission, the Planning Commission, and the Select Board, time to review their applications and then wait for the applicants to file with the Public Service Board. And at that point, we can consider the applications while they're going through the Public Service Board process. So one of the things the Public Service Board calls for is that the applicant make informal efforts to obtain any feedback from the municipality where the sites are going to be located. And in times past, what we've done is invited the applicants before the select board to present the project and to seek public comment. The most recent one was the first Winstanley project, which is adjacent to I-91, just south of the Holiday Inn Hotel.
Is that up and running?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I don't get that much.
Only to Walgreens.
The Walgreens.
At night, obviously, when the sun's not shining. So, okay. So if you go out in the daytime, and you'll see it. Okay. So, so the Public Service Board doesn't give much deference to municipal plans, and this has been controversial in recent times, and it also doesn't recognize the Planning Commission as an entity before it, nor does it take into consideration. So it doesn't take into consideration the town plan, and it doesn't take. And it
This
doesn't.
is a lawsuit
Well,
waiting to happen.
It doesn't.
right?
That's a little.
They take the general intentions communicated in the town plan. They do
Yes.
not take.
They can overturn, even if we specifically
Right.
said we don't want
Right.
this, they can overturn it because it's not just for us, it's for the
Yes.
good of the state.
So the certificate of the public good, the certificate of public good is set at the level of the entire state. So they're balancing the benefit coming from renewable energy for the entire state, achieving goals that are included in the comprehensive energy plan that the state has, up
Which
against. Okay.
Very interesting topic.
Yeah, up against any impacts that might be borne at the local level, which may or may not be able to be mitigated. So they're balancing the wider good against the narrower impact. And generally, they find that in their terms, meeting the wider good, which is increasing the amount of renewable energy, far outweighs considerations of localized impact. What I was going to say about the town plan is that you could have an explicit prohibition, or you could have explicit language that stipulated how and under what circumstances you would want solar panel installations of a certain size to be treated or dealt with or mitigated, and they're not obligated to take that into account. So even though, and what's complicated there is that if we had explicit language about other land use concerns, say about if we're a town that was, a ski resort town, we could include very explicit language in our town plan in the land use chapter about how, under what circumstances, a resort development could be proposed and where it could be located, and that would be binding under Act 250. Whereas this, so in other words, there are other areas of land use law where making explicit statements in the town plan is acknowledged and is responded to, but not under the public's, not under these. Right.
Yeah.
So, so we find ourselves in a situation.
So how are we looking at this?
Right. So we find ourselves in a situation where we're actually looking at something and have the ability to comment on it, and recognizing from the outset, a little bit like talking to your children sometimes, that they're not going to pay very much attention to it. But on the other
They'll be glad
hand,
to hear from us, and it'll make them feel better.
right.
When they're
And in the end, when they grow up, they'll realize that you were right. So, so that's where we're at.
Really long time.
Yes, exactly. So in this instance, we've got two. One of them is proposed for an industrial park, as we pointed out earlier today, and the kind of use, a solar panel farm, is not inconsistent with the industrial use. It is unlikely to have any visual impact beyond the boundaries of the industrial park, and there are, as far as I'm aware, no apparent issues associated with wetlands or disturbance. Or
Which one are you talking about right now?
this is the one on Exit 1 Industrial
The-
Park.
the Green Lantern.
Cut down
The
trees,
Green Lantern
so
project.
that whole-
Wait, are you talking about the
It's like
Green
the whole lot
Lantern?
is-
We're talking about the Green
I'm
Lantern
looking at the
project.
wrong one. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's zoned industrial, so there is on some level an expectation that somebody's going to remove some trees sooner or later to build a factory or something. So it's not, in terms of the area of impact, it's no worse than or larger than the impervious surface that you would expect to happen with say a 60,000 square foot a warehouse or factory development and the associated parking for 100 cars.
So is this right behind the dairy?
No.
What is
No,
this?
that's on John Seats Drive. Is that the bread?
This is.
What is this?
one
Is that
industrial.
GSP?
What are these buildings?
One
I'm
of them
sorry.
is Precision.
It's
just
GS
Precision.
Precision,
and the
it's
other one
GS
is
Precision
Bread
School.
Place.
So, and then it's north of the town's water tank. You okay?
Need a
I
map?
need a map. I'm
Here you
having
go.
No, I mean, I'm like
Oh,
trying to get
you
into
need a-
context.
Within
of,
the
like-
town?
Oh, like where you are?
Thanks, all right.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, well, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, the
Okay,
locust
Eleanor,
map.
Down in
We're
Guilford.
down at that place where we were looking at before.
You know where the bread factory is?
No,
Do you know where the plumbing store is?
no. What are you talking about? Are you on Route
Here.
5? I mean,
Yes.
drive me
This is
there.
91. This is 91 here.
Where are we? Wait a minute, can I do
Is it in here?
Don't you spend your
Yes.
weekends driving around looking at things like this?
No, wait a minute. It's here. This is John Seats Drive, right here. It goes right along.
Okay.
It's not
like
these-
us.
Oh, easily
One is
no.
GS Precision, the other
She
is
has a
the
life. She has a daughter. She has
Okay,
an
so
adorable
we have
daughter.
been talking about like over here, but it's in this area. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
So exit 1 industrial park is immediately after 91. As you're heading south on Route 5 towards Algiers Village, you take the very next left. And it's a long sort of...
That's there.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Can I
She
ask a
knows.
question here? This is a maybe question, but like, I really don't understand why we're looking at this. Like, it's an industrial use and an industrial zone.
Yeah, there's
Like,
nothing-
what's the issue?
Well, because it's before us and we have opportunity to comment. The comment is limited, but nevertheless, here we are, so let's wrap it up.
Okay.
So
I say this sounds fine.
So this one presents very few challenges. It's an it's an industrial scale solar installation in an industrial park.
The Conservation Commission also reviewed this last week and they were like, perfect location.
Right.
Good.
Sounds fine.
We don't have any comments.
On the other hand, let's move to the Winstanley project, which is on the terrace immediately north of the West River, just east of the bridge, the new bridge being constructed on 91.
I was confused by these pictures because I
This I
didn't
know
really
what
understand
What's it?
this picture relative to this picture.
This is that. So they're showing you on this site that this would be, like
This
the
is where
black
they would do
lines
it.
is that how the solar things would be pointing.
Right
Yeah, it'd be like,
Yes.
wee, like that. But, so it's not the whole site, it's like one,
What's it?
Should we let
looks
him
like it's
speak
just
to
like
it?
that bit of a corner.
And where's the existing solar? Is that this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Where they
Yes.
already have
Okay,
the
so let me
lines?
make it clear. This is not going to work. So this stippled area here is the existing site.
Okay.
It's just south of the Holiday Inn. The proposed one is this blob here.
So it'd be
So-
more lines going on this whole section would not have
It'll be,
lines.
I don't think it's the whole section.
It's gonna be
Yeah,
right
it's
there.
like-
Yes.
Is
like
it?
from
It's not showing the whole
there.
section.
Oh.
Remember, they did a 3-lot
Right.
subdivision. It looks like it's one of
This-
the
In the
lots.
flood
So-
zone.
No.
No, no, it's a
No,
lot
but
higher.
it is in our water and recreation.
Right. So see this large, see the top photo?
No,
Yes.
that's the.
You see
that's
this
the
whole
one.
area?
Yes.
Only the top third of it
This.
is going to be developed for
Got
this
it, okay.
solar installation, right? So about the top third of this area here.
Got it. Okay.
They recently
and they're
applied
going
for
to
subdivision to
allow-
just subdivide this one big parcel into 3 smaller parcels.
And they're going to accommodate the West River Trail.
Um,
No.
It's down lower, isn't it?
I'm not.
He says yes.
I'm the technical director of both.
Yes, you might want to recognize him.
Mr. Engel, would you like to answer that question for us, please?
What's that?
Would you like to answer that question for us, please?
Come to the
microphone and,
Okay, sure.
Sign in.
Any sort of questions you might have.
okay, so state your name
Dan in Gold.
and,
I'm the technical director both for the Winstanley Solar Development. So
Okay.
I was the technical director for the 90 Technology Drive, the large project, and also for the smaller project.
great.
And also am a partner with another company, Green Lantern, and we're co-developing the project on John Seitz Road.
Great.
Are related.
Only through you.
Intriguing.
Okay, so my question of whether the West River Trail will be accommodated in this development.
Yes, before the bridge renovations, the West River Trail actually was on a roadway down below. But because of the construction traffic going back and forth, they asked the Winstanleys whether they could relocate the trail to that upper terrace. And we allowed them to go on that upper terrace, and actually in the design, you will see that we're still allowing them to use that. The idea in the long term is that when the bridge is finished, that bottom trail will be reopened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But quite honestly, with the West River Trail, we're starting to get some people going further up to where the new chapter building is. There's actually some trail work up there. And actually coming to look up at the 90 Technology Drive, the big solar project. So one of the thoughts we were thinking of is actually, we'll work with the West River Trail on this, but actually having the means for them to come up and look at the smaller project right off the West River Trail. So, no, we are going to be very accommodating with West River Trail.
Great.
Short term and long term.
Thank you very much.
And I think it's in the permit to keep
I was gonna
some
raise that.
kind of thing for the
Yeah.
alternate route, 2 years or something.
And that's what we designed it for.
Yeah.
Under the subdivision, yeah.
It is a good opportunity to connect the West River Trail, though, up further to Technology Drive and kind of as a
Actually,
bypass
I
to
didn't
Putney
even know
Road.
about that solar installation. I actually got off of the trail a couple weeks ago and went out to Putney Road and then went over to the top of the
Yeah.
hill. I was like, psyched to be able
It's probably safer than driving that neck down,
So
biking.
Kathy was wondering, when we look at this map, it looks like it's in the blue area, which is water and recreation.
Mm-hmm.
And so does that zone allow for?
Well,
I mean,
first of all,
it's
that-
Well,
not
it doesn't
very
matter. It doesn't matter whether it does or whether it doesn't. It doesn't have bearing over this project because
Because of
it's
all
the
those
public
things you
service.
already
Yeah,
said, okay.
right.
I mean, I don't
But
have any,
but
I
not
don't
only
have any
that,
objection,
these are
but,
proposed zoning, and we're not there yet.
oh, that's right, thank you.
Right.
You can't actually see the current solar from the West River Trail. Like, I was not aware of it when I was on the trail until my son went exploring.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not visually.
It's actually pretty low
impactful.
profile, too. It's not very visible from the highway. I
No.
mean, you could see it, but if you're not.
So what are your plans for the
I
remainder
want to
of the
thank you
parcel?
because I've had a lot to do with that, trying to hide it.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What are your plans for the remainder of the property?
Unknown at this point. I think at this point it's going to remain fallow. There was some thought when we did the subdivision that Rod talked about of having a couple projects there. But with the state law, they're against close proximity for large projects. So I think we're one and done right there.
So, and that close proximity doesn't carry over to the other one, that's on 191?
No, the close proximity is for net metered projects only. So this is a net metered, we'll have one regional customer who will be taking the power off that. Where the large project is what's called a speed, feed, and tariff project. And that project is 4 to 5 times the size of the one we're doing at the lower field.
And why would the solar arrays only be on it's like the northern third of the?
That's easy, because we wanted to minimize the static impact. And when you put it there, one, you're at the noisiest place because you're right next to where the bridge is. So you have, high ambient noise background. But also, from an aesthetics from the bridge or anywhere else, you'll barely be able to see this.
That's good, because we went to a lot of trouble to protect the aesthetics of the bridge.
So the solar isn't using the whole of that,
No, it's
No,
the top,
just the
the top
top
third of that.
Yeah, just about
This-
the top third.
of this
where
block.
the end of the arrow is there.
Yes. So look, you see it enlarged in the bottom one. You see the shape that it makes here. So it's about a third of the way through. Just a sort of,
Yeah.
just a bit
See where the
further
road
up.
curves, you can
Right.
match it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I would point out that our town plan does say that this is we dropped a binocular in this area as being scenic, so.
And it's
Does
zoned.
that mean scenic from that place or scenic looking at that place?
Both, actually.
That it's a scenic asset, both to look at and to look for.
It is right at the highway, though.
Yes, but it also gives you a vantage point across the retreat meadows. You're about 100 feet above the water at that point, and so you have this panoramic view.
And you're coming
I
down
always
91 to go
envisioned
across the bridge, it's beautiful.
Waterfront housing there.
Right.
How noisy are these things?
What
Solar
about-
panels?
Yeah, I mean, is there noise?
There's
He was
some.
talking about the
No,
cars.
Dan was
Yes.
talking
The
about
ambient
highway
noise is way more powerful than you'll ever hear during the daytime from these. We're going to be using what are called string inverters and these pole-mounted transformers. It's a much smaller project than the 90 Technology Drive, but from a quiet, you won't hear it. And at
Is it-
night, you don't hear anything.
I just wonder about, as far as that visual, protecting that visual kind of scenic view thing, if there were a buffer zone of trees planted, kind of separating that. I mean, I don't know if that's something that we could suggest
Oh,
or
at
recommend.
At the sort of
Eastern edge.
Yeah, the-
southeastern edge of it.
Yeah, to sort of create a buffer there,
Mm-hmm.
so that if you, but I mean, is this all private? This is probably all private land anyhow, right?
But that doesn't,
It doesn't preclude us from
making a
Yeah,
suggestion.
I mean, I guess when I
I don't
see
know where
this,
you'd have-
when I
where
see
you'd-
this
yeah.
ring of trees here, and I think like, if that, you know, then you could still have this scenic,
But that's higher up.
yes.
This is like a plateau. here.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's a ring of trees around the
So-
entire plateau.
I think,
Up higher, though.
the intent though, of what you're suggesting is that, to make a suggestion that they take into account the views from the trail. So if somebody's on the trail and looking up, is that the intent of your suggestion?
I'm not, I mean, there was that question of what the binoculars are about, you know, if it's the view from or the view, you know, I mean, I guess.
It's one of the limitations of our map.
But is your question that you'd like a buffer between the third that's developed and the 2/3 that are remaining fallow to separate them?
Yeah, but I mean, as I'm saying it though, I don't know that it would make much of a difference because, I mean, from the trail, I don't think that you can, I don't know.
Trails down low.
You're much lower, you're 100 feet down at the trail, so I think that leading edge, if you like, that southeastern edge of the panels is not going to be,
Yeah, and that's not public, I mean, it's not like it's a public park up there, you know, it's,
right?
if it were, I would say put the trees
And you
there.
don't want to buffer too high, because that's
Right,
facing that
over
way
the
to
sun.
catch the sun.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a broad suggestion to be made, it sounds like we want to make sure that visually, you know, there's not a lot of aesthetic impact, maybe from any recreation area and probably also from the bridge as people are driving into Vermont. And it sounds like they've been pretty receptive to that with the
Okay.
first project.
Okay.
And Sue, do you have any more comments you want?
Just to make the observation that it's not the first best use of the piece of land. And that,
It's not the first best use?
yes,
Yeah.
It's certainly not what we had in mind for the waterfront zoning.
no.
And why did, because I wasn't here, why was this area, you know, this particular, I guess it's a field, and I'm not familiar with it at all, chosen to be included in the water and recreation
Oh,
zone?
because the marine-
Even though it was
it's-
quite up from the river?
Because it's a nice vantage point.
It's a sort of a naturally occurring terrace. I think it's been shaped by farming and other activity.
It
you
drops
know,
down
but
from this other edge, 20 feet.
I don't know, more than that. It's
More than that?
Yeah, it's a really high river terrace. I mean, from a geeky geological standpoint, it's actually a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah. Had it been
Um,
farmed at one point?
I don't know. It's unnaturally flat
Yeah.
at this point, but
Who owns all this?
Yeah, it was farmed, but when the interstate came through, that farm was divided up.
right.
Yeah, okay.
And the topsoil from all the acreage on the right side of the
Scraped.
interstate has been
Yeah.
scraped back in
Yeah.
the 30 years ago.
Right.
So it has not been farmed for 30 years.
Right.
I'm remembering, I said it earlier, maybe early on when there was some talk about CNS coming down there, I think part of the plan was that on this plateau, there might have been housing.
That's before.
Somehow, I don't know where,
There
I have it in my head
was,
somewhere, and I don't know where I
well-
got that from. Limited amount, but because it's,
Wasn't that part of the condos for Winstanley development? That was kind of conceptual.
I'm not sure.
There's been conceptual.
There's
I
been
guess,
various
yeah,
conceptual.
of condos and housing
Right.
there.
Yeah.
I think the
Not
Putney
a
Road
set
master
plan,
plan,
but-
I think,
yeah.
you know, just some
Talk here and there.
discussion.
Right, at various times. So it's unusual for us to have a tall, a high vantage point across, what is a really unique water body. So that the retreat meadows there are really spectacular.
Is it on the same vertical level as the interstate, or is it?
It's below, it's really
It's
interesting.
below
It's
the
below the
interstate.
interstate, but above the railroad tracks and above the water by about 100, somewhere between 60 and 100 feet, I'd say.
Probably a similar view from like top of the hill. No?
Could we make a suggestion that, I'm just putting this out here, but could we make a suggestion that because our intent is to include this in the water recreation area, that if they're using the top third for the solar panels, could we make some suggestion that they use the remaining area in something that's more in accordance with the purpose of the water and recreation zone?
Well, assuming that the draft land use regulations are adopted and assuming that they don't proceed with another public service board permitted renewable energy installation, they would be bound by the new land use regulations. So it would necessarily have to be something that was permitted under the water and recreation zoning district. I'm sorry, I know that's kind of a convoluted answer, but
You wouldn't have to write it in.
Yes.
that's it?
Yeah. You wouldn't have to
You wouldn't
write
have to
it
write
in.
it in, because it would already be.
Right.
And there would be no force, like by suggesting that, there would be no
Right.
rule of force, but our zoning.
The only way they can avoid doing something that's consistent with water and recreation if it's adopted is to do another renewable energy project.
And it would be too close to this one.
Right now, it looks you have to
Right.
be about 2,000 feet away from facility to facility, and we don't have that ability down there.
No.
The Conservation Commission was concerned about this one, and in particular felt like, there's been substantial investment in the bridge. It's been deemed to kind of have to be scenic, and now you're piling it. We're a gateway to the state, and you're piling on. You're building another one right next to the other one. It might be a different program, but nobody knows that when they're driving by, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden Brattleboro is bearing, this impact of multiple solar farms. That was one of their concerns.
What is the view from the bridge,
From the new bridge, where the new bridge will be,
from the new bridge?
it's been very difficult to see it. So we do have an aesthetic expert, TJ Boyle, his name is Mike Busher, and he's the one that also did the 90 Technology Drive aesthetic work. So he's already been down here, looked at it, but I want to offer, when he does his report and recommendations, I'd be happy to share that with the.
Do you have any way of knowing relative to the WE90 technology, how visible it would be from the highway?
Say that again?
Compared to the current installation, do you know if it will be more visible or less visible at this time?
According to Mike, it's going to be substantially less.
Substantially less.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, you have to remember 90 Technology Drive takes 13 to 15 acres. So there's actually about a 15-second, right now, because you're only going 50 miles an hour, hopefully. There's about 15 seconds where it's actually on the right-hand side. But because we left that
Not
berm
there, it's
where it
the
is,
road-
because we've done
road speed
plantings,
limit.
Yeah, you hardly see it, you can see
you
it.
have to kind of know that it's there.
Yeah,
I didn't notice it until it was done.
And that was the compromise, it's some people in front of the select board said, we want to see it, a few others said, no, we don't want to see it. So try to let people know it's there, but mitigate the visual effect.
Where's Waldo?
And I think it's worked out. I don't know if you all have, but I have heard no complaints about it being an eyesore.
the other one, no.
What's the
Well, we'll
parcel
make sure
size
if
for
there
this
are any
one?
complaints that they
About
direct
3
it to
acres.
you.
I'm local. You've got my phone number.
So that would be good to know. So when TJ Boyle produces the visual impact assessment, that would be an item that I think that would be of interest to the select board to review.
Yep. And I also have that same report for the John Sites Road for you.
Great.
I'd love to share that.
Well, thank you for coming, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
I was hoping to understand a little more about the relationship between this being a net metered project as opposed to the difference in the other project. Like, and this
Will
is
that
for one
proximity-
particular client? What does that mean?
Oh,
Oh, a net metered versus a speed project?
yeah.
Just various regulations.
So for you to actually receive a certificate of public good, you actually have to show that you have a buyer, you have an agreement with the utility company. In this instance, it's Green Mountain Power because we only have one. And so you need to show a contract, basically, that Green Mountain Power is willing to
Buy it.
buy the power. Or, in this instance, a project this small, you could have an identified single buyer it would still route through Green Mountain Power's network, infrastructure. But basically, you could have a private buyer that's willing to pay a rate, and that will generate income for Winstanley, but that single individual buyer could be buying the entire generation from the site, and so that they could achieve their own renewable energy goals or whatever it is. So if you're a corporate buyer, right, and you've got a commitment to switching from non-renewable to renewable energy, and you make an agreement and you buy the power at a set rate, again, the contract has to be shown to the public. The Public Service Board needs to know that the contract is in place, and certainly that Green Mountain Power has provided permission for you to place the energy onto the grid. And so with net metering, what you're looking at is you generate the electricity and you use the sale of that generated electricity to offset the power that you're buying from Green Mountain Power. So in this instance,
Or you sell it back.
right, you might end up with a positive balance.
Yeah, it's just intriguing to me because it seems like, when you're thinking about a certificate of public good, depending on how it's built, I mean, there's an idea of public good in that you're producing another source of electricity.
Renewable.
Right, another source of renewable electricity, but the relationship of the players is much different than
Right. So there
producing electricity for the grid as opposed to producing electricity for possibly one user that may, depending on how much electricity is produced, actually make money on it.
It's
just intriguing to me.
Yes,
that
I mean,
it's-
from a regulatory standpoint, arguably there's still a benefit. So,
Right.
If you're making 10 units of power every day and you only buy 8 and you sell the other 2 to somebody else who wants it, because it's renewable energy, it's still better than not having it.
Right.
It would be one argument, right? And if by selling those 2 units of power every day, that helps you offset the capital cost of installing it and maintaining it, then that's okay too, in the sense that then it's 10 units of power that you're generating
Right.
that you wouldn't be otherwise. So that's the logic behind net metering, that it basically sets it up so that even a residential user can be in a situation where year on year they may get a small check back from Green Mountain Power, or at least, it'll equal out, right? What they use in winter will be offset by what they sell in summer. And so this is a pretty large scale net metering project. It's at the limit of a net metering project. But the Public Service Board has different programs, and the speed one, I can't remember what speed stands for, it much bigger, with the one at 90 Technology, and that crucially uses tax credit. It's a tax credit based program to enable the construction of it, and so that's sold onto the grid, and that it's the sale of the tax credits that makes that economically viable to do. So I think that what you're seeing is just scaled programs within the Public Service Board. You can either be this big or this big. I don't know from our standpoint. It's an interesting question, but from our standpoint, it doesn't make any difference who's buying and who's selling.
Right.
We're interested in the land use impacts and what can and should be mitigated. It's a public policy question that's interesting, and we can delve into, but it's not a direct interest of ours.
Right.
Yeah.
But my question is, what are we obligated to do with this information?
My understanding, and Mr. Ungol can correct me, but my understanding is that they're going to proceed, they're going to submit these applications to the Public Service Board, and in that period of time between submitting it and gaining it, we're going to have a visit from the applicants. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right.
So nothing, it's just public information, and a
Right.
subsequent meeting will be asked to comment.
No, there'll be a subsequent meeting where the applicant will come before the Select Board and present the projects to the Select Board. We have the opportunity to formalize and write up the comments of the Planning Commission. The Conservation Commission commented on it last Tuesday. And so we can compile the comments in our office of both the Conservation Commission and the Planning Commission and forward those to the select board, and they can consider those at the same time they hear the applicants make a presentation.
And then they can,
So
they
we
can
didn't have any
provide comments?
on the first one, and we have a couple of comments on the second.
Correct. And so when that happens, our office will be asked to develop a letter that goes to the Public Service Board and the applicants, where we'll lay out comments. And so it'll end up being two letters, basically, one on John Stites Drive and the other on the plateau for Winstanley. And those comments will be directed to the Public Service Board and the applicants.
Great. We all satisfied with that?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good
Right,
night.
that was excellent. Explanation.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move, second.
You can-
Oh, I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in
Okay,
favor?
thank you.